from if you just go into a bookstore in Germany and buy the Nibelungenlied, it's probably what you're going to get. And you can see there's some differences here, like why did he choose to spell the name differently, right, with a K instead of a CH? I don't know. It's just something he decided to do, right? And that's kind of the problem here is, by what criteria does Karl Barth get to say that we spell Kriemhild's name with a K instead of a CH? Okay, it's not a big deal, it's trivial, but it's still, when it comes to bigger things, that can be a problem. And I think the Grimms, when it comes to, actually, what's my next slide here? Oh, yes. When it comes to the Grimms and folktales, I think they were trying something similar as we get here. That is, collecting various versions of folktales. The way back at the day, there was a lot of excitement for collecting various medieval manuscripts. That is, they'd try to figure out what was older, what's better, and they didn't necessarily make a big difference between the words older and better, right? What better, of course, is older, right? So I think that's what they were really trying to do, is take a sort of they were trying to take what they had learned from medieval manuscripts and apply that to folklore. And of course, it doesn't really work that way, because manuscripts, well, they burn, they get wormholes, they get smudges, they rot, they get water damage, but at least there's still something there that you can read. Folktales, of course, they're supposed to be all in somebody's head, or a group of people's heads. So what they tried to do with Dorothea Feeman was convince us all that she had perfect memory, like a medieval manuscript, basically, that she was the equivalent of a medieval manuscript. And so they write here of her, if anyone believes that traditions as a rule are easily corrupted, that is, oral traditions, that their preservation is neglected, that is, that, there's not a 1,000-year-old tradition of Cinderella, for instance, and therefore that they cannot long survive, he should hear how exactly she always tells the same story, and how zealous she is about correctness. She never changes anything when repeating it, and corrects a mistake in the middle of a recitation as soon as she notices it. So what they're trying to do here is convince us that Dorothea Feeman, that their source for fairy tales is basically this. That is a medieval manuscript that, yeah, okay, there may be a few mistakes, a few smudges in her memory, but she and everyone before her was trying really hard to keep it exactly as it was. And that's how the Grimms were thinking they were going to get access to ancient or old German folk tales. Now, nowadays, nobody believes that. So, oh wait, that's that. So what does this all have to do with Dothraki, or whatever that thing is in Game of Thrones? What is it called? Dothraki? Dothraki, yeah. Or Tolkien, for instance, inventing languages and so forth. Well, the Grimms were, for different reasons, doing something similar to creating a subculture. That is, they were trying to tap the past to, and not just in the folktales, but in everything they did. When it with not just, but with Deutsche Grammatik, with he wrote another 4-volume work, several other 4-volume works called German mythology, or German myths, and German legal history, German legends, and so forth, and also the first German dictionary, not the first, but the first real scholarly dictionary, which is the German equivalent of the Oxford English Dictionary, the Grimm's Dictionary. Everything they were doing, they were trying to tap into sort of old German culture and reprocess it for the modern era, to kind of build a German culture that they thought had been damaged by 1,000 years of bad luck, basically, in German culture. And when I say bad luck, I mean things like the Reformation that divided Germany and kept Germans from each other, from having a unified culture, or the 30 Years' War, which tore Germany apart. That's the sort of bad luck they were thinking of, that they were trying to restore German culture from before that time, and that's why they were so interested in the correctness here. So I think how we might consider the Grimm's collection to be something sort of like Lord of the Rings, but that is not like a historical novel, but a philological novel. And like Lord of the Rings, there are certain functions to historically and philologically derived art. For Tolkien, it was probably mostly about, as I said, mostly about artistic integrity. But for the Grimms, it was about a lot more, about contributing to German nationhood in a way. That much is clear to me. But the question I still have to answer is, and at this point I'd be interested in hearing what you all have to say about it, is if we can't trust the Grimm's tales as a representation of history, mainly because of all the changes they made, does that mean that the scholarly function of the Grimm's tales is completely lost? I think it's safe to say that nobody reads Tolkien, right, for insights into, well, I don't know, Mary, does anyone read Tolkien for insights into medieval English culture? Tell me about that later. I don't think so. That's not why I read Tolkien. And I don't think Tolkien intended his work as such, but the Grimms did intend their work to serve these two functions, to be a testament to old German culture and as and so that testament can contribute to building the new Germany. I think it's clear nowadays that those two goals are incompatible. So my question is, can we still gain insights into medieval German culture from the Grimm's tales? Yeah, I think so, but I'm not quite sure how, because we kind of have to trust the Grimms that they got it right. So thanks for listening. So I just take questions here now? Okay. Yes?
Can you assume the Grimms were interested in the unification of all?
Oh, definitely. Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, no, I didn't. But yeah, Jakob Grimm, he took part in the Frankfurter Parliament in 1848. This is in 1848. There was the revolution, started in Paris but spread to Germany, and it was. Yeah, I think Jakob Grimm would actually be quite happy with Germany nowadays, except that it's a little smaller than he intended. But I think he was definitely interested. His idea of what Germany I think should be was sort of a liberal democracy in a lot of ways, though more ethnocentric than I think most people would find acceptable today. But yeah, I think he was definitely interested in the unification of Germany. And that's why he took part in that doesn't come out in the Göttinger Sieben incident per se, but if you read, for instance, the preface to the German dictionary, I mentioned that Jakob Grimm started work on this, not just Jakob Grimm, but Wilhelm Grimm too. They started work on this scholarly dictionary of the German language, which nowadays is, I'm not even sure how many volumes. It takes up a lot of shelf space. And Jakob Grimm, they worked on it till the end of their lives. Wilhelm Grimm wrote D, the letter D, and Jakob Grimm did A, B, C, and, well, I think he got some help with some of the letters, but F and G, he died during G. And the joke is that he died while writing the definition of genug, which means enough. But anyway, in the preface to the dictionary, he actually writes about this, that he was, first off, you can tell he was writing this at the end of his life, and he was still carrying a chip on his shoulder about Göttingen from 40 years earlier. He starts off on the first page talking about what a jerk Ernest Augustus was in Göttingen, and says, but I hope, and the failure of the revolution, he talks about the failure of 1848 to unify Germany, and he writes, but I hope this I'm not quite quoting exactly, I'm paraphrasing from this when I read it a few years back, but he wrote that he hoped that his dictionary would help serve to unify Germany culturally, if not politically. And he died, both of them died before 1871, when Germany was actually unified politically in a not so humanistic way. But, so he didn't actually live to see that, but I guess he contributed to the cultural side of things. Did that answer your question? I started rambling, I think. Yeah. Well, I saw Richard's hand, so sorry. Yes?
Can you, I guess, contextualize a little bit the very beginning, the original volume of the fairy tales? What possessed them to start collecting? Was it just this group of women who met and exchanged tales, or was there some other subcurrent at the time?
I couldn't quite hear you, but that you think they were interested in just hanging out with these teenagers?
Can you contextualize
the
very beginnings?
Yeah.
What got them into wanting to do the research on past German culture.
Yeah, yeah. It wasn't just because Wilhelm just wanted to meet Dorothea. I think that was it. But okay, no, I'm kidding. Well, both of them, a couple of things. I forgot to mention during the talk, while they were studying law, mainly Jakob, but Wilhelm too, they studied under this fellow Savini, who was he was sort of a wunderkind. He was only a few years older than the Grimms, but he was already a tenured professor at Göttingen. No, Marburg, I'm sorry, Marburg, where they studied. He was only a few years older than them, but he was already a tenured professor of law. His specialty was Roman law. And he was really interested in the history of law. And that's kind of what got Jakob, at least, interested initially in studying ancient Germanic laws. That is how Germans decided things back in the day, so 2,000 years ago or so. And that's what initially got them interested in antiquities. The fairy tales, they got involved tangentially, at least, with das Knabenwunderhorn, which is another that has to do with a lot of their buddies and their sort of the romantic poetic movement, namely Clemens Brentano, who, if I'm not mistaken, I think he married their sister Lotte. I think they had one sister, Lotte, their younger sister, and Clemens Brentano, I think, married her. Well, there was some family connection there, and someone can pull out a smartphone and see who Clemens Brentano was married to. I think it was Lotte Grimm. But yeah, and his idea was to, along with in the spirit of Herder, who was this sort of philosopher of nationalism, a generation earlier than the Grimms, was to collect songs of the Germans and publish them. Same basic idea, but Brentano was a poet himself, professionally, and not just Brentano, but others. And so his idea was to use these stories to basically write his own poems. And the Grimms they worked a little bit on this Knabenwunderhorn, but ultimately they weren't really they weren't really interested in Brentano's method of doing things. So they wanted to develop their own less poetic method and more philological method for recording old German stories, fairy tales, folk tales, and so forth. So it's a little bit ironic that nowadays our main problem with the Grimms, or at least not ours, but the critics' main problem with the Grimms is that they changed the stories, because that's exactly the problem that the Grimms had with Clemens Brentano. But the roots of the children's household tales are in this Knabenwunderhorn. So, yes?
Yeah, you mentioned the Bartsch's version, that's the German version of the fairy tales, right? Bartsch is sort of the commonly accepted one right now.
Well, that's two separate things. I was just pointing up, what I was pointing up there was the Lay of the Nibelungen, which is a different text.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah, I was just pulling that up as a comparison, because that's a series of medieval manuscripts.
Fair enough. And when that was translated then to the English,
yeah.
Isn't there additional license taken by those translators?
Well, hopefully not today, but okay. I don't know about the Lay of the Nibelungen.
What worries me is the German translation. Okay, you got this final German version of the fairy tales.
Yeah.
And then that gets translated to English.
Yes.
How clear and how much controversy is there about that translation that we read as Americans?
Okay. I haven't forgotten you two. But, so it's interesting. The Grimm's folk tales made it to England very early. They've been translated internationally now. They're popular internationally. But and they made it to England quite early. A fellow named Taylor, I think, got a hold of the first edition. And Taylor was kind of a hack. He did translate it badly, or according to his own desires. And he wrote a very influential preface to the stories. And I don't think he even did a complete translation, if I'm not mistaken. He just translated what he wanted to translate, kind of how he wanted to do it. And I'm not even sure how competent he was. I haven't really investigated his translation so closely. But a lot of the sort of the myth of the Grimms that we have today is from Taylor. That is a lot of sort of the misconceptions that the English-speaking world has about the Grimms go back all the way back to Taylor, and how he presented them. Whereas the Germans don't necessarily share those misconceptions, because that's something unique to that translation that showed up, I think, in very early, 1820 or something. Does that answer your question? So I think I saw you with a question.
How many folk tales are contributed to the group?
All in all, about 220. So if you pick up, so there were 7 editions, 7.5. In the first edition, I forget exactly how many there are, maybe a couple hundred, no, excuse me, maybe a little bit over 100, fewer more than 100 or so. Over time, by the 7th edition, they winnow out the ones they don't like, where kids murder each other, for instance. And by the 7th edition, every story that's been in a edition of the Grimms, it amounts to about 220. If you pick up the 7th edition, you won't see 220 there, unless they have an appendix with stories from earlier editions. So it's about 220, I think. I think that's the final number. Is that okay? I saw another hand here. Oh yes, Alec.
You mentioned Charles Perrault.
Yes.
The most famous tale, and many French fables and tales have tragic endings.
Oh yeah.
Little Red Riding Hood, the wolf eats the grandmother, eats the little girl, they're dead. Little kids are terrified.
Yeah.
They tell them, don't talk to stranger when you're little. Beware of the wolf. There are other morals for the nobility and so on. In English, they added the happy ending with the lumberjack that saved them.
Well, actually, that was the Grimms.
Did they keep tragic ending or did they change it?
They actually added 2 endings to that story. They had an alternate ending, sort of the outtake. They did have the lumberjack come by and cut open the wolf and rescue Grandma and Little Red Riding Hood. And let's see, what was the? Oh no! There was a second ending. No. Sorry, they wrote they added a sequel. I think was what it was, where the wolf comes by. No, the wolf is dead. What happens there? Oh no, where Little Red Riding Hood learns her lesson. That's it. And another wolf comes by and she tells it to go away. I forget exactly how it goes. But they did add that kind of positive sequel. See, she learned her lesson, kids.
But in general, are ending tragic or happy?
Happy.
Okay, so that's different because most French tales and films have tragic endings.
Yeah, no, I'd say they mostly, again, it had to do with sort of the bourgeois parenting aspect of things. But yeah, making parents happy was one of their goals. And so yeah, happy endings usually, and the bad guys suffer, and they suffer a lot. Jen.
Isn't it true that what the Grimms called German tales, actually there are many variants of some of those basic tales that occur in different cultures all over the world?
Yeah, not just different cultures, but I mean within the same area. As I said, Wilhelm Grimm would write down a story from his wife and say he collected it from Hessen or from his neighborhood, right? Not being very specific about where in his neighborhood, but and yeah, there were different variations within this. You don't have to go very far to find a different variation, and that's what they would do is sort of mash them all together, what they like, and but yeah, in internet. Okay, that is an interesting point because the Grimms, as I said with the second edition, they added a 3rd volume of commentary, and they wrote a sort of history of folklore or folk tales collections in which they said, oh, the Italians were great. Basile, I mean, they were a little bit vulgar, a little bit too much sex, but they were great. They liked them. The French were okay, but again, they're French, a little too vulgar. And then, if you were a German writing fairy tales contemporaneous to the Grimms, and then they had nothing good to say about you, basically. They spent a lot of time criticizing the competition. But then they did, they spent a lot of time, at their time, there weren't so many collections readily available because they're pioneers, so there weren't a lot of people who had done what they had done already. There wasn't a lot available, but they knew that, for instance, or they thought at least that the Slavs, the Czechs and so forth, had a lot of great tales. They just didn't know about them yet because they didn't have time to deal with those yet. And they knew a lot of languages. I don't want to say they didn't know Slavic languages. Maybe they did. But they didn't spend a lot of time on Czech tales. But they knew about it, the variations, the international variations.
Like the take this opportunity to thank Tom. If you have any further questions, please come on up and chat with Tom afterwards. Thank you very much for a very, very educational seminar. And please join us on November 11th for